I'm Dane Rose. If we think about intelligence, and we think about intelligence tests, for example, how to fit 8 different triangles together within a square, or some other puzzle. The ultimate measure of intelligence is how efficiently we achieve the goal. We recognize a pattern. We explore all the different probable expressions of that pattern, and we transform that pattern in order to achieve the goal. Well, why do we want to be free? Why do we want to have money? What's the ultimate goal? Sustainable well-being for ourselves, for those we love, for our people, for the species, and for the ecology upon which we depend. Well-being, as opposed to suffering, sustainable well-being as opposed to unsustainable well-being. That's the goal. And we are all biologically programmed to pursue that goal indefinitely, to create more and more sustainable well-being. Now, if we think of intelligence at its peak, it's measuring the efficiency with which we respond to the reality around us, with which we convert energy into sustainable well-being. So the idea in a geometric puzzle of some kind, like how do we combine triangles? The reason we think that has something to do with intelligence is we extrapolate, right? We say that if you can organize geometric shapes, if you can combine letters, then you're probably going to be able to solve questions about well-being faster and more effectively than someone who can't recognize a pattern and respond to a situation. That's the theory, right? But it doesn't always hold up, right? You can organize patterns and create a nuclear bomb more efficiently than anyone else without creating more sustainable well-being than if you couldn't do that. So the ultimate measure relating to the ultimate drive is to feel sustainably better, and is to measure the efficiency with which we convert time, money, attention, and natural resources to produce sustainable well-being. Now, this gives rise to what is perhaps the most intelligent question. A question, a quest, right? You create a space. You create a space between where you are now and the ideal. That's a useful question, right? Because that orients you, right? If you have an ideal and you know where you are now, you now have a direction to flow that is a divine or sacred connection, because the ideal, your personal rendition of beauty, truth, and goodness, is always about growth. It's always about becoming more, right? Your God, your goddess, by definition, is more than you are. And its function is to point your energy in the right direction. The right direction being relative to the wrong direction, right? The wrong direction is towards ugliness, towards inefficiency, towards stupidity, right? Why? Because ugliness, stupidity, inefficiency creates more chronic and unnecessary suffering. And your ultimate goal is to facilitate sustainable well-being. And you could think that, why not create your sustainable well-being and let other people suffer, right? And within the paradigm of a scarcity mentality where there isn't enough, this seems like a good step, right? But that paradigm is an illusion, meaning there is a boundless amount of energy all around us. And the right recipe, what's a right recipe? It's the recipe that allows you to facilitate your goal of sustainable well-being. The right recipe can transform that unlimited amount of energy towards sustainable well-being for as many people as want it, right? We're moving towards a probable reality of superabundance, right? Cheaper and cheaper electricity, safer and safer cars, more and more efficient production of food, the ability to purify and recycle water upon demand, more and more information, more and more science, more and more people available to collaborate to do more and more things. There is far more energy than we could ever utilize, and the right recipe, the recipe that facilitates our goal, allows us to take a small fraction of that energy and create all of the well-being we seek by fulfilling the basic human needs of anyone who wants those needs to be fulfilled, to survive, to be secure in that survival, to experience love and belonging, to have ideals, to have ideas of beauty, truth, and goodness, and then to establish pathways or principles, protocols, principles, a path from where we are towards those ideals. Right? I want to live in a world of trust. Why? Because it's more intelligent than a world of distrust. Meaning, if you trust people effectively, if people are intelligent enough to be worthy of that trust, you can facilitate human well-being 10 times more efficiently than if people are too incompetent to be trusted, or you are too incompetent to trust, right? If you don't trust people, you need to have locks on doors. You need to have keys. You need to have passwords. You need to hide things. You need to lie, right? You need to keep your distance, right? Well, all that consumes vast amounts of energy. If that energy is pivoted, is utilized to facilitate mutual sustainable well-being, then you realize that well-being 10 times faster. A world based on trust, on the foundation of trustworthiness, is 1,000% more efficient at converting energy into sustainable well-being for all than a world that is based on lies, misinformation, secrecy, defense, locks, paranoia, superstition, right? Fear of loss, anxiety. All that defense protocol based on the foundation of an incompetent and untrustworthy group of people becomes available. All that time, all those resources become available to increase the yields of sustainable well-being, right? So the ideal of a trustworthy world with the principle or pathway towards that of becoming more trustworthy. My ideal is a trustworthy world. I want to become more trustworthy. Right? These are the things that make me more trustworthy. These are the things that make me less trustworthy. Self-esteem, the need of every human being. To earn self-respect, to earn esteem by adhering to the path that leads to the more beautiful world, that takes us towards what we believe beauty, truth, and goodness looks like as our current ideal. Right? Self-esteem. Every human being needs self-esteem earned by staying on the path towards what we find beautiful, true, and good. We need to develop and discover our gifts, our skills, the things that life has made us uniquely gifted at transforming, at bringing into the world, at gifts, at strengths. We need to discover and we need to develop our strengths. We need to create superabundance by bringing value into the world for ourselves and others with those strengths. We need to become part of something bigger than ourselves. Right? There is enough energy for every human being to fulfill their human needs. And the intelligence of the individual, of the group, of the cult or culture can be measured by how efficiently and how reliably each human being that has an innate drive to feel sustainably better, an innate drive to become more intelligent, an innate drive to grow, is enabled on that path. Right? So there is enough energy. And the question, comes from the ideal. What is the thing that we can do as individuals, as a group, as a species? What is the thing that we can do that allows us to most efficiently navigate the path from where we are to the beautiful world, towards sustainable well-being, towards efficient realization of every human need? Now, the every human need is an important part because in order to be trustworthy, in order to have a world based on trust, there can't be unwilling sacrifices. Oh, let's let those children die because it's for the greater good, right? That's not a trustworthy statement. It's incompetent, right? It just means that the intelligence is not high enough to find a solution that doesn't sacrifice some of our people, right? That kind of thinking and behaving leads to trauma, leads to the virus of fear of pain, based on the awareness that we're too incompetent to meet the needs of all. So, living in the quest, living in the question, How can we facilitate the most amount of sustainable well-being with the least amount of energy, with the least amount of unnecessary suffering? Here we are. There is the ideal. Is the ultimate question of intelligence. How do we get from here to there? How do we step towards that reality of sustainable well-being for all, where every human's needs are fulfilled reliably, consciously, with mastery, where the individual understands, here's how I meet my needs, where the culture understands, here's how each person meets their needs. And there's a synergy between the mastery of the individual and the mastery of the cult or culture. To create a cult or culture out of which self-realized, self-fulfilled people grow and have the opportunity to reliably win. Now, when I asked myself that question for 30 minutes with a budget of $30 for 30 days, how can I have the most amount of sustainable well-being with 30 minutes with $30 for 30 days? Right? What can I do that benefits myself and other people? Living in that quest. Well, one of the paths of intelligence is leverage. Right? If you want to have the most amount of impact with the least amount of energy, right? Because it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to make one person happy with $1 billion, with 10,000 years, and consuming all the natural resources on the planet. Right? That's just incredibly inefficient. But what about a few minutes with little or no money at all, with few, if any, natural resources? What if you could bring well-being to 100 people? Right? It takes more intelligence, takes more skill to have a higher yield with less energy, more reliably, more efficiently. So it's a useful quest, it's a useful question, and it leads to leverage, right? You don't want to reinvent the entire world. That takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time. So you want to think of leverage. How do you change something very small that 10x's the amount of well-being that is generated by a large existing infrastructure? That's intelligent. And when I looked at the most important technology on the planet today, it's information, right? Because a piece of information piggybacking on top of the innate biological drive of sustainable well-being, of feeling better. See, if people know how to reliably feel better, if they have certainty, if I make this change, I'll feel sustainably better, then that innate drive kicks in. And information takes pennies. Why? Right? Because of Wi-Fi, because of cellular networks. In other words, if you can put the right information into a pre-existing infrastructure, such as laptops, internet, cell phones, and deliver that information for pennies, the specific information that allows someone to pivot from one way of farming to another way of farming, from one way of eating to another way of eating, with certainty, with statistical certainty that the pivot will result in a 10x in sustainable well-being. If you plant these trees on your farm as windbreak in 10 years, there'll be a 10x return in this area of well-being. If you collect water in these ways, in 10 years, there'll be a 10x increase in well-being, your access to water, right? If you desalinate water in these ways, there'll be a 10x increase in well-being. If you can locate areas in a personal life, in a family, in a school, in a church, in a neighborhood, in a country, if you can locate areas where the gap between the best practice and the norm is 10x, and provide the information, the recipe, the path to go from the inefficient protocol to the efficient protocol with certainty. Here's why it works, here's the probability field, and here's the path where people like you have made the transition from here to here to here. And this is the probable result that leads to a 10x improvement in well-being in this area. Best practices delivered with certainty that relate to who you are and how you live your life is the highest and most intelligent expression of energy. To deliver the data, the pattern of a best practice from the most intelligent minority. And this is a very important thing, so we'll pause here for a moment and talk about the law of mass and the law of intelligence. The law of mass dictates that when a bowling ball and a pinball, right? So here's the bowling ball. When a bowling ball and a pinball collide, the pinball goes flying. The bowling ball continues on its original trajectory. When the majority, when the mob, collides with the individual is traumatized and derailed. And the herd, the mob, the crowd, the majority, continues largely unaffected in a head-on collision. But here's the thing. The bowling ball is always wrong relative to a distinct minority, right? Because the law of intelligence, right? Intelligence is the measure with which an individual or small group transforms energy into sustainable well-being, i.e., applies a new technology. The law of intelligence says that technology is always evolving, is always becoming more efficient in search of more well-being, costing less energy. And at the time of invention, right, it's not a static process. The evolution of technology, which is a pattern for transforming energy into well-being, be it language, be it thought, based on language. The evolution of technology is facilitated by a small minority. And at any given moment, the latest technology, the most efficient path to convert energy into sustainable well-being is held, is being embodied by a very small group of people, right? You think of the fax machine. It's 10 times faster than delivering mail by van, which is 10 times faster than delivering mail by horse. But when the fax machine first comes out, only a few people have fax machines. So the most efficient technology is occupied, is realized by a very small number of people, by the minority. By the time the majority adopts the fax machine, the minority has invented email, which is 10 times better than the fax machine, right? And by the time the majority has adopted email, the minority is using instant messengers, right? And by the time the majority is doing text messaging, the minority is doing video messaging, right? It's always growing. It's always iterating. The best practices in the world, in any field, are always held by less than 2% of the population. Right? So the law of mass dictates that when 2% collides with 98%, the law of mass says that the 2% is sent flying. The pinball is knocked out of the way, the bowling ball continues. Right? But the cliff, right? The bowling ball continues not because it's intelligent, but because it's bigger. Right? And when it falls off the cliff that the pinball was moving away from, right, it collapses just like the pinball. Right? So you have this tension where the majority is always wrong relative to a distinct and intelligent minority. And the majority has the ability to bully, dominate, overpower, ban, tax, and torment the minority, as well as dismiss it. Right? So the minority, a distinct minority, is more intelligent than the majority. But the question becomes, are they intelligent enough to lead the less intelligent majority towards the new protocol, right? Because if not, the minority gets knocked over. The minority fails because of the power and importance of networks, right? The majority offers the benefit of the network. There may be a language, for example, that is 10 times more effective than English for communication, right? Nobody's ever designed a language with first principles and spoken that language, developed it from scratch and said, you know, this takes less sound and less time to communicate more data more efficiently than any other language. So we're going to design this new language. Now, someone has done that, but it hasn't caught on, right? Because they were intelligent enough to design a language that was 1,000% more efficient, but they weren't intelligent enough to make a case that the rest of us believed that we should all learn their language and that the entire species should pass that language on to the next generation so that the species would become 1,000% more efficient at communicating. That hasn't happened, right? So the minority not only has to be 1,000% more intelligent than the majority, but it has to be intelligent enough to demonstrate to a less intelligent majority that the minority technology is worth the effort to adopt, because all change has a price, It has a price in time. It has a price in money. It has a price in lost momentum. To uninstall one software and install a new software that's 1,000% more efficient still requires weeks of confusion. And what do I used to press Shift P when I wanted printing, and now nothing happens. And what do I do here? And it has to be good enough, and the transition period has to be managed well enough so that in the short term and the long term, the majority can see and experience the upsurge in well-being. Data, patterns of energy delivered to individual that identifies the areas of that individual's life that is most eligible for an upgrade. What's an area eligible for an upgrade? Well, you and I are doing things today that create chronic and unnecessary suffering without knowing there's another way of doing it, without understanding how we're doing that. We're expending energy, time, money, and natural resources today to live mediocre lives in a number of areas. And yet, we cannot pivot to a more intelligent protocol without first seeing the connection between the time, the money, the natural resources, the attention, the thoughts, the feelings that we're investing in our mediocrity, are creating that mediocrity, and knowing how to redirect that energy to create something 1,000% more intelligent, 1,000% more efficient at converting time, money, and natural resources into sustainable well-being. But were I to know that that was a certainty, or a 95% certainty, since everyone is unique, were I to know that 95% of the people like me who make this pivot see this benefit, and then to know how to do it and how to overcome the obstacles in the way, then you and I would be making those changes today and be excited about the probable increase in well-being that awaits us. This, then, is the greatest technology the world has never seen. We have information delivery technology that can deliver language to more than 1 billion people and counting in seconds for pennies. That's in place. We have the technology of language that allows us to convert words into meanings, that takes sound into symbol, and symbol into thought, and thought into action. Every person on the planet can speak, can think, can convert an idea into action. And we have a paradigm, the scientific mindset, where we understand, for the most part, the power of probabilities. Right? When we see a statistic that says that 98% of the people that enter a casino and place 100 equal bets in the casino will leave the casino within a matter of hours with little or none of their initial money that they walked in with. But that 75% of people that put that money into stocks or real estate in a relatively stable currency and leave it there for 15 years will come away with that real estate being worth more, with those stocks being worth more than they paid for them 10 or 15 years prior. When we see those statistics, we have the information to decide whether we want a dopamine rush over the next 2 hours by gambling, or whether we want more money over the next 2 years, 10 years, 15 years by investing. Right? And if we're dealing with grief, if we're dealing with trauma, if we're dealing with compulsive avoidance of feelings, we lack the emotional literacy to navigate more consciously. We can decide whether numbing our feelings with gambling, with dopamine distractions for the next 2 hours, is the most effective way to deal with our grief, to deal with our guilt, to deal with our shame. Or if responding in this way, and this way, and this way has a much more reliable outcome. So we have the cellular network with more than $1 trillion being invested in that network, meaning more than $1 trillion has been spent on phones. And more than $1 trillion has been spent on wireless delivery devices. And more than $1 trillion has been spent teaching individuals to speak and to think with language. And more than $1 trillion has been spent on developing the scientific method of probability fields. And more than 1 billion years of biology has entrained in every individual the desire to feel better. And if they think about it, the desire to feel sustainably better rather than short-term better. Short-term better you can buy with cocaine, right? But there's a lot of things, sugar highs, cocaine, affairs. There are a lot of things that feel good in the short run, running up credit card debt, and feel bad in the long run, right? We have trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars and resources and time invested in these technologies, cell phones, wireless delivery, language, the scientific method. And we have more than 1 billion years of training by life to seek feeling better and to avoid chronic and unnecessary suffering. Now, there is a small percentage of people, in many cases less than 2%, less than 2% of the therapists and healers, less than 2% of the doctors, less than 2% of patients, less than 2% of teachers, less than 2% of principals, less than 2% of politicians, less than 2% of farmers, less than 2% of exercise teachers and coaches. There is a small percentage of people that have more experience, that have more competency, that have more data, that are more trustworthy than the other 98%. And they're doing things 10% more intelligently, 10% more efficiently than the majority. And so if we think about the ultimate expression of trustworthiness based on competency, right? Because in order to be trustworthy, we have to be competent. A trustworthy surgeon has a steady hand, not a jerk, right? Going in on a main artery and they have a twitch, right? It's not competent surgeon. Or they thought it was another vein. Oh, I thought that was a different vein. Or, oh, I thought that we had to pinch the blood here, but we don't, right? Competency has to do with the efficiency of delivering a yield reliably. 99% of the heart transplants that I do see the people waking up alive, versus 10% of the heart transplants that I do see the people waking up alive, versus none of the people that I attempt to do heart surgery on are waking up alive, right? So competency is the foundation. Competency and empathy are the foundation of trustworthiness. Do I know what I'm doing? Do I know that I know what I'm doing? And can I deliver the promise, right? Because anyone who looks to someone else as a leader, as a professional, as a doctor, as a healer, anyone who defers to another is doing so based on a promise that they will be better off for doing so, that they will have more sustainable well-being. You go to a doctor not because you believe they will kill you more efficiently than the neighborhood gang, but because you believe they will give you a better chance of a healthy life, of a longer life, than if you don't go to see them. Every human action is based on that belief that doing this, that deferring to this person, that giving money and power to this person will increase our yield in sustainable well-being. Even the seeking of revenge, as in hiring a hit person to seek retribution, is based on the belief that making the other person feel or experience the suffering that they caused you or your family will feel better than not doing so. That is the basis of retribution, of revenge, right? And even if it doesn't work, even if the revenge doesn't make you feel as good as you thought it would, you're doing it because you think it will. Even if the drug prescribed by the doctor has worse side effects than the pain it was supposed to cure, you went to the doctor based on the belief that following the doctor would yield better results than not following the doctor. When you called a plumber, you did so because you believed they would stop the leak, not because you wanted them to flood your house. All trustworthiness is based on competency. And the highest competency, the greatest recipes, the greatest skill, the best records, right? The best statistics. The person that gets that done 98% of the time rather than 10% of the time. Those best practices, those recipes, are in a very small minority of highly competent people. Now, there's an important phenomena to understand that sociologists have discovered, and that is that while only a very small percentage of people are very competent in any given area, they are the only ones capable of measuring how competent they are and how incompetent everyone else is. Everyone else, in an incompetent state, cannot evaluate how competent they are or are not relative to those that are more competent, because it takes the same skills, the same level of competence to be competent as it does to evaluate competence. Right? So you have a large group of incompetent people that lack the competence to understand their incompetence and who overestimate their abilities. Now, if we could engineer this very, very small percentage of the best dietitians, the best psychologists, the best doctors, the best life designers, the best cultural designers, the best athletes, if we could, first of all, isolate these reliably from the majority. Number one, find the 2%. Isolate the 2% based on results, based on competency. If we could isolate the minority from the majority, number one, in specialized fields, we're not talking about better or worse human beings. We're talking about better and worse doctors. We're talking about better and worse teachers. We're talking about better and not people that live our lives, right? There are people living their lives that are 1,000% more intelligent than we are. They're bringing 10 times more sustainable well-being to themselves and others while using less natural resources and less money than we are. In other words, they're vastly more intelligent in that area. This is the first hurdle. To design a protocol for measuring and locating the 2% based on objective results rather than dogmas, right? Because to the uninitiated, to the 98% who are too dumb to evaluate their level of stupidity, they cannot evaluate the level of competency of this person or this person in the 2%. It takes a highly competent person to evaluate the competency or incompetency of another part of the 2% and of the 98%. So this is a protocol that needs to be worked out. The 98% can just read Harvard or Yale or some Ivy League university and say, well, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know what they know. I just know they came from Yale, right? And that's not good enough, right? Because there's divergency. There's a huge range of competency coming out of these universities. It's not good enough. So we need to be able to isolate the 2% that are really good at something. The best in the world at cutting watermelons. The best in the world at growing cucumbers. The best in the world at protecting children in dangerous road situations. The best in the world at blowing bubblegum bubbles. The best in the world at making healthy food with minimal ingredients. The best in the world at keeping vegetables fresh in the fridge. We need to be able to isolate specific talents from all the other talents, right? Because right now we have a cult of personality. Someone who sounds the way we want them to sound, usually like us. Someone who's rich, someone with a symmetrical face. We like their presentation, and so we listen to their nonsense. Someone else, disfigured face, stooped back, surly temperament, knows 10 times more in a given area. We don't listen. because we don't have the competence to evaluate the skill. We just judge the personality. So this is a really important protocol that awaits development to crowdsource the location of excellence. To have your peers, to have your friends, to have those around you noticing this person might just have the best way to cut watermelon anywhere in the world. I want to nominate that person for consideration in that best practice. The best way to do this, the best way to splint a leg on a hike, the best way to keep someone alive in the cold, the best way to protect whales, right? So that's the first step. How do we do that effectively? And I think crowdfunding with useful blind protocols is the best thing. In other words, the best way to evaluate someone's expertise is to do A/B studies. You know, if there's a contest, and take the people out of it, right? Bias disappears when an orchestra hires based on sound, right? In other words, if you show a white German male in their 40s with a distinguished artistic flair and a little goatee, etc., and they have their father was a musician, and they make good rapport with the judges, they get better scores than a stammering 7-year-old black girl who doesn't fit the stereotype, who doesn't fit into the dogma. But if you have a curtain and the musician back here and the judges out here, the judges there's no name, there's no data. And that 7-year-old black girl who stammers and can't look you in the eye plays the best Mozart sonata with a violin that anyone's heard in years. She gets hired for the job of lead violin because it's based on blind results, right? When you do A/B studies and ask 1,000 people in this demographic to try this protocol, and this one has a 3 times better result. The person who came up with the protocol's expertise in that area goes up, right, to top level, right? That's how you find best practices rather than being locked in dogma and personality cults. So that's the first challenge and the first step, is to isolate who has the knowledge, the technology that exceeds everyone else in that area, or that is in the top 1% of that area. That's the first challenge. And an app is the perfect way to do that with double-blind testings, right? You can do a series of tests and competitions without revealing identity. No age, no sex, no race, no money. Just the protocols. And you earn your way up through success, right? Because the most competent people know how to succeed in this and this and this with this demographic. Right? And because people, unlike prestigious universities that are trying to manage endowments and all, people just care about results. Right? If you learn that the person that helped you lose 50 pounds of fat and reduce your depression by 300%, is a schizophrenic teenager who likes heavy metal and is rude, but 90% of the people who follow their protocol don't have depression anymore. Who gives a damn, right? It's about the protocol not the person. So this is the first, and it is an enormous step in intelligence. How to de-link the personality, the person, and the protocol, and how to de-link one area of expertise from all the others. Because the person that cuts watermelon more efficiently than any person in the world may be a terrible lover, may not know where the Antarctic is on the map. They just know how to cut watermelon more efficiently than anywhere else, right? So you're measuring very specific areas because we like to generalize, right? We don't like to think. We don't have the technology to specialize expertise. So someone who is good at getting a lead role in a movie, we want to hear their opinion in politics, right? It makes no sense, right? And so this is the problem. The majority, 98% of us, are so dumb we don't know that we're dumb in a number of areas. We're so dumb that we look at other dumb people for results, like famous people, right? You're famous, let's hear what you have to say. We're so dumb we don't realize we're dumb, so we ask other people who are dumb their opinion. That's dumb, but then again, dumb people don't have the ability to A, evaluate that they're dumb, B, understand the full cost of their stupidity, and C, know what to do about it, right? So this is the first step. Isolate best practices in blind person-to-person studies. Now, you don't want these to be millions and billion-dollar studies. You want this generated by people who care. Now, usually the people who are exceptional at playing the violin actually care about playing the violin, right? So they will share that expertise for free in many cases because they love their subject, right? The most knowledgeable person about ants and cutting up leaves and, leaf-eating ants and all that. If they've spent 40 years, they want nothing more than for the world to understand what they know about ants, right? So love equals attention to detail, and attention to detail equals excellence. And love equals generosity, equals passion, equals service in your particular field. Right? If you're a drummer and you're the best drummer in the world, you're excited to meet other excellent drummers, and you're excited to put your techniques and things that you've learned out there. Right? So that's a huge starting point. Now, the next thing that we need is receptivity, which is built in, right? You and I want to know how to be the best lovers in the world. We want to know how to be happier. We want to know how to be healthier. We want to know how to spend less money doing it, spend less time doing it, consume less natural resources doing it, right? We want to know. That's programmed in. That's biological. We want to feel sustainably better. We don't want to feel chronically worse. That's built in. What we need is to believe based on data that following the set of data provided by the best people in the world is actually from the best people in the world without politics and being sold off to the highest bidder, right? We need to believe that, and then we do it. But how do we know amongst all those data, why should we study the best watermelon cutter in the world, or learn about ants, or learn how to do traditional folk dance, or yoga, or read this book, right? What things actually pay off in our personal well-being, right? We don't know that either. And that's where demographics come in, right? Because when you do a lot of A/B testing, let's say you're a white 47-year-old who enjoys books and is mildly depressed. That's your demographic. So there's 20 million of you, and you're all doing different things. And let's say that 2% of you do this one thing and stop being depressed. And 2% of you do this thing and cut living expenses by 70%. Right? Well, that might be of interest. I'd like to be happier and cut living expenses by 70%. Who's done that in my demographic? Well, these 2% have. And who's stopped being depressed and fearful about the future? Well, these 2%. What did they do? Well, they read this book, they traveled to this place, they ate this diet, they started chanting this mantra, and they jogged in these parks. Okay, let's break that down. So this is the diet, this is the mantra, this is the book, right? And you look for correlation. Now, if 100% of the people who do those things stop being depressed, that's a pretty good track record, right? We were depressed for 20 years, and then we did these things, and every one of us who does these things is not depressed. Pretty good. Well, you might want to give that a try. Let's start with the book. Do I feel more or less depressed? Okay, less depressed. Let's start jogging in this park. Do I feel more or less depressed? Less depressed. I eat this food. Do I feel more or less depressed? Less depressed. I chant this mantra. Do I feel less? Okay. So for some people, it has a major result. For some people, it's a 50% reduction in depression, right? But then you check off that each of these things is working, right? For one person, it gets rid of 80% of the depression. For another person, gets rid of 20% of the depression. But for everyone, you're making headway. Well, every time something works, you receive the gift of knowing what worked for other people, their generosity in putting that out on as metadata. And your only obligation is to tell the truth. Didn't work for me. Great, right? Now you become part of that statistical data pool. It doesn't work for 5% of people. It works for 95% of people, but you're part of the 5%. Now, why would that be? You could then help delineate that. Is that because you, what delineates you as the 5% that doesn't work from the 95? Is it a genetic thing, right? So human drive, if that data set is out there, if there are bets that you and I can do on a daily basis that have a 95% chance of increasing our well-being based on the demographic of metadata in our data set, we're going to experiment, we're going to explore. We're basically providing a 10 times more valuable data set to 10 times more people based solely on how relevant it is to well-being. And the question is, like, how does this happen, right? And if you imagine a 10x well-being app, what does the app need to know in order to facilitate everything we've just been talking about, right? Remember, the trillion infrastructure has been spent on the phones. More than 1 billion people have the phones. The trillion in internet has already been spent. The trillion in teaching everyone how to speak a language has already been spent. The billion years of biology is inside everyone. Everyone wants to feel better. And so we just need to empower the flow of data that will first allow us to isolate top people, right? So the app needs a protocol of blindly testing results. Now, how do you do that? Well, You or someone else can nominate you for a specific area of expertise, number one. And that's going to have a series of strengths, right? Your mother says that you're really good at this. Your best friend says you're good at this. Everyone in your village says that you're good at this. Your high school teacher says you're good at this. So each of these are strengths that point towards the nomination for competency in a specific area. And you nominate something, right? Now, the next thing, so now you've got a series of nominees. The next filter can be designed by someone who has demonstrated high competency in that area. Now, in some areas, it's easier than others, right? If you have an ear, you can tell that Yo-Yo Ma plays a beautiful cello, right? It's not too hard. You may not be able to evaluate high mathematics, but someone who has made numerous contributions and made, gotten some of the biggest awards may be able to tell, right? And so tests by experts are another filter, right? Now, the most important filter of all, once you pass through 1 and 2, is the third, double-blind tests, right? So if you know what you're doing, you should be able to, first of all, know where you know what you're doing and where you don't, for what demographic you know what you're doing and what demographic you don't, and how to do better in that area relative to the majority. Those are the three things you must know if you actually know what you're doing, which allows you to design a well-being double-blind test. And what this basically does is it says, I want people of this nationality, this language, this age range, this experience level, doing these norms in this area. I select the people. And I say that if you change what you're doing to do this protocol, A, B, C, D, you should experience a 10 to 1,000% increase in success in that area. If I know what I'm doing, I can say that with a fair degree of certainty. If I don't, I've no business being nominated as part of that 2% in a given area. Now, this then involves a study, right? Because there's no bias if nobody knows who you are. This is a blind study. You don't know if it's a man, a woman, a Jew, a rich person, a poor person, an alligator or a tiger, right? It's a double-blind study. And it needs to be labeled as a study, right? This is a new entrance into this area of expertise, right? Who wants to try these things? And it should be a safe experiment. Now, if there are 10 people designing studies and 10 different groups testing them, and one group gets 1,000% higher results than all the other groups, then you know that that person is 10 times more intelligent, more competent in that area than the others. And the other people should be learning from them, right? Based on the data. It is a blind data set. Now, what can be the motivation of these things? Well, certainly prestige, right? Because although the people testing you can't know who you are in order to have a good set of data, right? And all this is free on the app, right? It's an algorithm that filters for this. You can't cheat it. If people are sustainably happier because of something someone has designed, it doesn't matter if it's a blind 5-year-old or Einstein, right? It doesn't matter. All that matters are the results in people's lives. But the amount of well-being that person generates can go to a point system. I helped 1,000 people lengthen their lives by 10 years. Well, that's 10,000 years of human life you created. That's worth something on your profile. I created 10,000 years of human life. I created 200 million smiles. I made people laugh more than anyone ever made anyone else laugh, right? So generating sustainable well-being is the ultimate currency. Money is a shadow of a substitute. It's a symbol of a symbol of a symbol that doesn't always correlate with more well-being, and certainly not sustainable well-being. But I added 10,000 years to human life. That's a pretty direct metric, right? And so recognition, status, rank, respect, the ability to give one's gifts, and the currency of well-being, right? Someone asks you a favor for your talent and you see they've saved 3,000 lives. Do you want to give them a hand? Right? So there is an instinctive empathic currency. There's also the opportunity to charge money, right? You've led to 10,000 hours of human life being kept in the land of the living, right? So I'd like to hire you because you've saved more hours of human life than anyone else per minute that you've been in service in this area. So this data set, and having it be clean, having it be decentralized blockchain and derived for people, not for profit at the expense of distorting the data. Because if your primary expense is money and you've got everyone using this app, then there will always be people that offer you $1 million, $10 million to make them look good or better than they actually are because they're buying prestige. And you'll make more money, but people will be harmed by the distortion of the data. It's not intelligent, right? But people will do it if they believe the delusion that money, a symbol of value, is more valuable than the actual well-being that is created. Well, now that you have identified the best experts, they have to keep demonstrating their point on that bell curve of competency by the amount of well-being they generate without anyone knowing who they are, right? Because there's placebo effects, right? You know, if Einstein says this, then maybe it's true. But if a 5-year-old says that, well, that's nonsense, right? So it's important to keep testing in A/B studies or in, 2 different people vying for top position of competency in a given area. I say that we should cut watermelon this way. Okay, let's have 1,000 people cut watermelon that way. How many people cut their finger? How many watermelons were cut in an hour? How tired are people after cutting? What was the type of knife used, et cetera, right? Well, the data is clear. This group of 1,000 people got more done with less energy and less injury. That's the way to cut watermelon. Until another study shows that there's a better way to cut watermelon, right? That there's a better way for a heart transplant, that there's a better way to do therapy. So the dissemination of best practices without bias through a screening process is a tremendous step forward for humanity. The next process is to deliver the protocols and practices to the people that need them most selectively without flooding people with far too much information. And here's where we have the blockchain in-depth metadata profile. So how do we know that the number one thing you need for your well-being is a colon exam? Well, it's an analysis. 10% of people in your demographic get colon cancer. That cancer reduces quality of life for 5 years by 70%, let's say. And it only takes 1 hour to do a process that avoids that. And it only costs $100. Well, you do an analysis and you say that, well, if 10% of cancer patients can go down to 1%, if everyone spends 1 hour and 100 in this demographic, that's a good trade-off. So you get a push through the app that says that this is probably the single most important thing that you can do for your sustainable well-being based on the probability fields. You're given the data set and you make your own decision. And a majority of people are going to do something about that. Now, the key is an ongoing, never-ending, updated profile of data. And the question is, how are you going to get all this data, right? Well, first of all, encryption, and secondly, metadata, right? Everyone wants to know how they are like other people and how they're not like other people. Curiosity is an innate drive. And people will share things anonymously as metadata, providing they have privacy, confidentiality, so it's risk-free, and it allows them to compare themselves with everyone else, right? And that's what allows for crisp, accurate metadata, right? I want to know how many people were raped by their brother. Nobody's ever talked about it, and I'm too embarrassed to bring it up. So you go into sexual abuse, you go into rape, you go into family rape, and you say, I was raped by my brother 3 times. And check, check, and instantly you see of the millions of people in your demographic, how many people, what percentage of people were raped 1 to 3 times by an older brother? You realize, 1%. Then you can look into how do you process that? Like, of that 1%, how many people are dealing with it well? How many people don't know what to do with it? How many people have just moved on? And you can start reading the story. I did this and I'm confused. Or you can ask for help in that subset, and only the people in that subset, anonymously. You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. You just know that you're within the state of California, for example, and they're like you. Only they can give, like, this worked for me, this isn't working for me, I need help, right? And so you learn within your subset who is doing well. I'm hit by a car and lost my job. How many people have been hit by a car and then lost their job? Right? I used to be a model, now I'm disfigured, and what is that like, right? How many people are ex-models? They've grown out of it, and how many of them feel good about it, and how many don't, right? These are data sets, and everyone is desperately curious and interested in talking about themselves and understanding other people. So the protocol is this: how do we create the best data set that has never existed on the planet? Simple. You have an endless profile that's curated, meaning you can't ask the same question 20 different ways. You have people that care about given areas of their field, and they curate the slots. And everyone is invited to, in small doses, why not answer this question and learn how you fit in with everyone else? How many people were depressed after high school finished? Were you depressed after high school finished? Yes. Now you instantly see 15% of people are like you, or 2%. And then for how many of you did the depression last 3 months or longer? Right. And then you see, that subset of data. And then you can learn and read a story about that. Who's written a story about that? And you can learn and say, oh, okay, that's me. I'm not alone, right? How many people got a benefit from asking from a second opinion for a doctor in this situation? How many people feel like the second opinion was a waste of time and just took more time and money, and it actually hurt them because they didn't have the immediate operation? So you learn, when breaking an arm, getting a second opinion is a waste of time 95% of the time, but handling a brain tumor, getting a second opinion is a benefit 70% of the time, based on your demographic and what people are saying about that. So it's an endless profile, and it's motivated by curiosity. You cannot see the answers of other people, and you can't cheat, meaning the protocol in the app says you only have one time to answer this question if it's about your past. You can't just fish. If you want to know how everyone else in the country answers that question, you've got to answer the question, right? And your answer to that question is private, but the metadata is not. So you're creating metadata as you learn about yourself and about other human beings. And you're telling the truth because you want the app to be targeting someone like you. When the app says this is the best thing out there for people with cancer like you, you don't want that recommendation to be based on a bunch of lies. You thought you looked younger than 55, so you said you were 45, and now you're getting the best cancer recommendation for a 45-year-old that doesn't work well for a 55-year-old, right? So all the data coming to you trying to help you gets off the mark if you lie. But if you tell the truth, you have 100% privacy, and you have the app's ongoing updated support saying, what's your biggest problem in life? You tell it. I'm afraid of being homeless. Okay. These are the best steps that people did to stop becoming homeless. And these are the best preparations for homelessness that people did to survive homelessness. And you learn that. And then if you do any of them, you update and share, did it work, how much, and that becomes part of the data set. So there is a possibility, a probability that this project adds 1,000% to the sustainable well-being of the human race on the planet today, while consuming less time, less natural resources, and less money than the human race is consuming on the planet today, while reducing chronic and unnecessary suffering by 1,000%. And there is a high probability that this app can be brought into existence and can function indefinitely for $30 a year per person who uses it. That you can have 1,000% increase in sustainable well-being and 1,000% reduction in chronic and unnecessary suffering for $30 per person per year who uses it, which makes it the biggest investment and intelligent investment for any government for all of its people, that this can create the most educated species that has ever existed on the planet. And this app is a few years away from existing. It doesn't take more than 11 million in seed capital for dedicated volunteers to bring this to life. That makes this the most intelligent enterprise that the human race has ever been involved in. And I appreciate the quality of your attention. I appreciate you making it this far. I appreciate you considering lending your time, your skill, your contacts, your talents, your money, your resources to making this project a reality.